Thank you. Good morning. So this is the usual people sitting way in the back, scared to death. We're not asking any questions. If this is what President Clinton used to say about working in the White House, there were a lot of people under him, but no one was listening. Anyway, I'm Howard Tullman, as you heard, and I'm going to talk to you about commitment. And I wanted to start by just talking about our newest program, which is, I don't want to step on my cords here, which is the Kaplan Center, which we're building a new 70,000 square foot facility at IIT, the campus of IIT, which is at 31st and State. And it will be a resource for the school for all of the students there, graduate students and undergraduate students, to focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. So we're really excited. It'll open in October, and it's sort of a new project. It's what I'm going on to do. I've sort of officially retired from 1871. 1871, if you don't know, is the year of the Chicago fire. We named our incubator 1871 as well, a little bit like calling your new venture Titanic 2. Not a little confusing, but post the fire in Chicago, which destroyed about half the city was rebuilt. And it was a period of tremendous renaissance. And the skyscraper was invented, the Ferris wheel, that important food group, the Twinkie, was invented. And so we decided that technology could use a similar kind of lift and a similar kind of location. And so built 1871, 5 years later, it's ranked #1 in the world. Not easy to do, but it was a process. And we did it with a series of steps that really, to me, sort of memorialize the process of being committed and signing up to do something and to make change happen. And the most interesting thing about this was, in the first year, the design was completely different. It was designed to be a community place that would be supported by sort of Good Samaritans and charitable organizations. And it turns out that's not a business model. It's not something that is actually a formula for success. So we had to radically change everything there. And we had to do it sort of while the thing was still up and operating, and thousands of people were there as well. And so what you discover is that you need to have consistently a clear vision and also an appreciation that these things don't happen overnight. But you have to also learn to be really flexible. You want to be committed, but you want to be flexible because you really can't project what's going on. And the other part of that is that speed is really important. And, you know, the theory was that here was this huge obligation and this huge responsibility, all of which was fine, but you couldn't take a break, you couldn't slow down, because the pace in our lives is just continuing to accelerate really dramatically. So when you do this, when you sign people up to what's going on, it's really critical to basically say that they have to be a certain kind of people, and they're people that like to do whatever it takes. And one of the ideas was that every job was important. Every single task in the place was important. And there was a right way to do it, and then there was a half-assed way to do it, or a way that just was sort of phoning it in. And eventually, those folks weren't going to be successful, and we did them the favor of showing them the door. So a few lessons sort of on how you go about building something like this that I think are important. The first thing that's really critical, sorry, I'm standing on top of my cords here. The first critical idea is that democracy is a great concept, but not if you're trying to build something and get it actually done in a reasonable fashion. This was not a popular concept, but it's something that you really have to understand. I mean, you can take in a lot of ideas, but eventually you have to make decisions, and you have to make decisions quickly. So when you're in this process, sort of part two of that is that you make the vision and you set the vision up there, and then you really have to be fierce about honoring the commitment. And the commitment is always to the vision. It's always that there's a lot of opportunities. There are people who come in every single day and want you to make compromises and say, it can be on time, it can be on budget, it could be done well, pick any two. And we're like, fuck that. We're going for the whole 9 yards because this is really important. And so when people enter this kind of an environment, they are watching for signals. And they are also very happy to say to you, yeah, I get it, and then to go do whatever they intended to do. And so you have to be difficult and you have to be insistent, and you can't let people sort of, this is a French term, you can't let people grin fuck you, which means they'll smile and say they're going to do it, but it doesn't turn out that way. Don't quote me on that. But look, this idea of enforcing the vision is really, really important. This is the first way that you represent the passion and what you really want to accomplish. And so this idea of enforcing your values is really critical. You have to put them out there, and you can't make them sort of so-so. You have to say, this is really what it's going to take to build something special. And then you have to be difficult, we call it intolerant of breaches, because if you're not doing it every single day, 5 years on, 1871 looks like it was built yesterday. Why? Because we walk around all day and clean up and pick up and make sure that things don't get shabby or things don't get changed. And that's a whole part of messaging what it takes to be special. And, what grew out of this was there are 1,800 other incubators in the world. We don't care about them. What's hard is to beat yourself. What's hard is to get better every single day and to understand this process of iteration, which every athlete understands, everybody who's successful understands. You get better basically by getting better every single day. So in this process, the other thing that we learned that was so important was, we're building a new building, or we built a building, or we built hundreds of thousands of square feet of space. The process, how we went about it, how we respected all the trades and all the people. And we had the first dinner ever for the guys who did our drywall and did our paint and everything else, and they got to bring their families. And it was to sort of indicate to them that their work was as important as anybody else's work that went into the project. And it's in that process of being committed, not being the boss, but showing that you're willing to do what it takes, that the message comes through. And this is, one of the most important things about commitment. It doesn't come because you have the technical office or the sort of the org chart responsibility. It comes because you message that basically you're as committed and you'll do whatever it takes to get the job done. We like to say that nobody gets to just come and eat a piece of chocolate cake. So at 1871, we have a really small group. We have about 29 people. We support 2,000 people a day, about 20,000 people a month. And you heard that this center does 500 events a year. We do 1,000 events a year. And to do that, there's a couple of things that go into that. Every single person on the team has to work their butt off. Every single person on the team has to be committed to the way that you do things. And you have to model the behavior. If you want to convince people, you have to model the behavior and live that. And what we discovered, and this is true of every place you go, that when people enter this kind of a culture, it's contagious and it's magic. And so our shorthand for this whole thing, this whole vision thing and commitment thing and everything else is just one simple phrase. And the phrase is that you don't get what you wish for. Hope is not a strategy. It's a nice thing, but it's not a strategy. What really pays off in the end is work. So the first idea is this idea of how a singular vision, how a commitment to details, how a focus on every single thing. That's not micromanaging. That's demonstrating how important the components are to building up to something that can really be special. Number two was that critical mass really matters. Bringing together all of the resources is the way that you build one of these places. And it's very interesting. This is a design consideration. We tell the architects all the time that, especially these days with open offices and different kinds of strategies and ideas, we tell them all the time that the space's job is not to be super beautiful or, elegant. It's to get out of the way. Because what's important in the space is facilitating what goes on with the people in the space and the interactions of all of those people. And what we discovered is that if you're looking for change, if you're looking for the way things are going to happen, especially, it's all at the edges. It's all the disruption that comes from the outside. And, when you think of Uber, Uber is not a better taxi company. It's a different platform solution. When you think of Tesla, it's not a car with a few chips. It's a computer on wheels. These are the sort of adjacencies that are going to bring about real change as we go forward. And so managing an environment where people are constantly colliding and ideas are colliding and what rises to the top are the best ideas, that's the kind of environments that we try to build, and then we try to match people up. And so, as I said, the first part is this idea of where are you going? The second part is sort of why and bringing everybody together. And then there's an obligation to be actually a real business, to actually mean that, all the Good Samaritans in the world, all the charitable organizations in the world are not going to be sufficient to sustain a long-term business that's actually going to change things. And that's what we found. And what we discovered was that when you set one of these organizations up, what you have to do is make it a win for everybody. It has to be something that each person says, I'm going to do this because it makes sense to me. I'm going to do this because it's in my self-interest, not selfish interest necessarily, but they need to understand that they're doing it for a purpose that's bigger than them, but one that's also a joint purpose where everyone comes together. And if you demonstrate this kind of commitment, if you constantly commit to raising the bar, then that too is a contagious kind of opportunity. One of the things that's happening in our lives is just how radical and how quickly technology is changing. Today, the computers are better than we are at almost everything, maybe not creativity, but certainly at things like facial recognition. And if you think it's easy to do facial recognition, let me tell you that the difference between the mutt and the muffin is really, really complicated. And so what's going on? Well, we built this huge enterprise. It's exciting. It's energizing. You walk into the place and people are, walking just a few feet off the ground. It's really sort of a fascinating thing. And what did we learn from it? What are the takeaways? Well, the first thing to understand is you may understand exactly where you're headed. You may understand exactly where you want to end up, but this is not something that just because you see it as a clear view that it's going to happen overnight. And what we discovered was there were a lot of people who explained 4 million reasons why this was just going to be okay, why this wasn't going to be special, why it wasn't going to get done, why it wasn't going to be done in a special and different way. And the answer is that commitment to me means a very clear thing. It means that every single day you're overcoming all of the naysayers, all of the people who have a million reasons as to why you can't do it, all of the people who are skeptical or don't think that these things are possible or that change is very, very difficult. Yeah, it's difficult, and it's what we do every single day. And what we kept in the back of our mind as we went through this and got over all of those objections and all of those people and sort of persevered was another sort of thing that we say all the time, which is pretty soon we'll have the ability to turn around to these people and say, fuck off and suck it. And again, this is a very important thing because that's the satisfaction, but this is not an end game. This is not a situation where basically an entrepreneur says, okay, that's great, now I can stop, because there is no finish line in this kind of stuff. So we built this amazing place, and it is aspirational and it's inspirational. And the bottom line for everyone, and this starts in our schools, by the way, this is why we teach in the schools, this is why we've built environments for 4th graders and 5th graders and 6th graders as well. Because if you can't see it, if you can't see yourself as a part of these things, then you'll never become that. And so we want to show people a very simple proposition. Here's the vision, and then here's how you get there. And if you don't do that, if you can't do the people the service of helping them understand what you're asking of them and what the commitments are going to be, then you're not going to be successful. I mentioned before this idea that we clean up, that we pick up, that we maintain the place. And this is the nature of building something new and different, which is you get to create it, but then the job, and this is the job of everybody who builds software, this is the job of everybody who builds any kind of institution of change, is you have to keep at it. And so when you think about that, one of the interesting things is when you have a constant flux of new people coming in, when you have thousands of people who are engaged in the process, how do you educate them? And part of that is, well, you give them a rule book or a handbook, except the truth is that you can't do that in today's world because there's not a book big enough. There's not a system big enough. So we don't have a set of rules. We have all these crazy maniacs running around the place, inventing the future. And what do we tell them? We don't say, well, here are the 400 rules, please memorize these. What we tell them is, here's what we expect. We expect you to behave in a certain fashion. We want to give you all the resources and the opportunities that we can. And then we want you to build off of that and to respect everybody else while you're doing that. And what we discovered is when you start down this path, if you're diligent, if you're persistent, and if you stick to your knitting, basically, it's very, very contagious. And on the other hand, if you're lackadaisical or if you're forgiving, if you're not intense, then you discover a different thing, which is basically that businesses become whatever the lowest common denominator of behavior is. And so handbooks won't help, rules won't help. What helps is to instill in your people this belief that you do things in a certain way. I'll just give you a quick example. So there's a great Chicago charity called Chicago Cares. And each year on a day certain, 5,000 people turn out for Chicago Cares. And they go to schools and they go to other places and they clean up and they paint and they help improve the environments and do all of this kind of stuff. And last year we sent a team to one of the schools, and they went to a school that turned out to be a STEAM or a STEM school actually, and their job was to paint the hallway between the first and second floor, repaint it, and CPS, because CPS is nothing if not organized, gave them a stencil to paint on the big wall in the stairway, and it was a cool stencil. As I say, this was a science and math school, so they gave them this wonderful stencil with, division and multiplication, all this kind of stuff. There was only one thing that was a little peculiar, was a bunch of gray men, okay? Now, we've been to this movie, okay? So I remember the man in the gray flannel suit, and I remember what things were like at IBM. So our people, though, start from the proposition that you do the job. And so they were pretty conscientious. And then about sort of midstream, about halfway through the putting up the stencil, they said, we didn't come this far to just cock this thing up. I mean, 20,000 kids a year are going to pass through this hallway. So they decided that they were going to change it up a little bit, and they made their own thing. And what's really important about this is that in making their own version of this, they sent a message to the kids, they sent a message to everybody who was involved. And what's our message? Our message is, you can explain these things to people all day long, but you can't understand for them. They understand because they're committed and because they believe in what you're trying to accomplish. And if you do that right, that's the kind of people that you turn out. So part of this idea of tolerance, but also being honest, is that organizations grow in two different ways. They can grow by people getting with the program, adoption, or by attrition. And you know what? You have to be picky. Because if not, if people are just phoning it in, if they're just there because their parents figured $400 a month was a cheap way to get them out of the basement, let them call themselves an entrepreneur for a while. The truth is that they're going to kill the culture. So everybody in our place is turned on. Everybody in our place is committed and excited to what they're doing. And as I say, sometimes you also have to say to even the most committed people that the baby is ugly, and babies are occasionally ugly. So another part of what you do in enforcing the commitment to doing things right and carefully is metrics. And at our place, we measure and we see how the companies are progressing. And there are literally millions of ideas. There are only hundreds of good companies and good opportunities. So this idea of up or out is really important. And it's a big part of the process. And again, we ask people to talk about not just contributions, but commitments. And how do I define that? Well, if you think of bacon and eggs, the chicken makes a contribution, but the pig makes sort of a more substantial commitment. So look, the bottom line is, if you want to build a place that is going to work, if you want to have an organization like this, you need to understand a couple of things. One is you have to make room for people, all kinds of people. And those people are people who come as a package, and talent is really peculiar. Some of these people don't believe that bathing is necessarily a daily activity. Some want to work just in the evenings. But you can't really have effective change and innovation. You can't have this kind of excitement if you don't get everybody to buy in. And so this kind of stuff, inclusion, doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you make it happen. And good intentions and all of this wonderful talk doesn't mean anything if you don't basically put your money where your mouth is. One of the things we discovered was we were spending about $10,000 a month on pizza. Now, that is, in fact, entrepreneurial sort of DNA food, but we thought, you know what, we could do something a lot more meaningful than buy a whole bunch of more pizzas from Domino's. So what we do now is we buy all of our food from minority vendors, from local restaurants, from women-owned businesses. And this program has made a huge difference, because to spend hundreds of dollars every week on local businesses is meaningful to them. And honestly, Papa John's and Domino's doesn't really care what we do. And so, again, the idea is, how do you commit to the whole 9 yards? How do you commit to a special place, to giving back, to including people, to making it all special? And, you know, the other thing that we learned about this is that you never know who is going to come into your environment that's going to make an amazing difference, or that's going to see things in new ways. And one of the parts of that that's so critical is, people think that 1871 is all complexion challenged, 15-year-old boys. The truth is, the age distribution is amazing, because we have serial entrepreneurs, we have career changers, we have people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. And it turns out that innovation isn't age bound. In fact, this is one of my favorite innovators. I love her pearls also. But to give you a quick story, she went into a bank in New York City. She lived in Scarsdale, but she went into a bank in Manhattan, and she said, I'm about to take a week-long cruise, and I'd like to borrow $10,000. And they said, well, you seem like a perfectly nice lady, but we don't know you from Adam, and it's not our custom to lend random strangers, as pleasant as you are, $10,000. And she said, well, I'm only going to be gone a week, and I'd really like to borrow the money, and I just live up in Scarsdale. And they said, not really. And so she said, well, I have collateral. And so now they said, all right, well, now you're talking. This is a very expensive car. So they took the car, they gave her the $10,000. She went off on her cruise. She came back in a week, and she said, here's your $10,000. And I think it was $6.10 in interest, and got her car keys back and was going to the parking lot to get her car. And they said, Mrs. Whatever, we checked you out. We went to your bank and talked to your bank in Scarsdale. They would have lent you $20,000, $50,000, whatever you needed. They've known your family forever. How did you come to our bank? And she said, well, where could you park a car in New York City for a week for $6.10? And so entrepreneurs look at the things that we've looked at forever, and they can be any age, and they have a different take on things, and that's what's so exciting. So, end of the story, what's happened with 1871? Well, what's happened is it's changed the city. Tech used to be 2% of the economy. Today, it's 14% of the economy, hundreds of thousands of new jobs. All of that is sort of a part of what we committed to do about 5 years ago, which is change the future. So, thank you very much.